when a letter written in pencil on wide-ruled notebook paper changed everything. Nobody saw it coming. Not the bank, not the lawyers, not even the woman who was about to lose the only thing her family had spent 80 years building. Picture this: a farm in Mineral Springs, North Carolina. 42 acres of red dirt and memory. A red barn door. A pecan tree with initials carved into it from 1941. A farmhouse that has held births and deaths and Sunday breakfasts, and 30 years of a man quietly painting that barn door every single spring without being asked. Now, picture that same farm, 9 days away from being taken by the bank forever. $187,000 in debt. A final notice sitting on the kitchen table. A grandmother named Cecilia, who has been holding this place together alone with 2 hands ever since her husband passed away 2 years ago. And a family that built this land from nothing, from a tin can full of saved nickels under a floorboard, about to watch all of it disappear. Nobody had a plan. Nobody had the money. Nobody knew what to do. Except for one person, an 11-year-old boy named Tobias. He couldn't drive. He had $23 in a jar on his dresser. He had no connections, no power, and no backup plan if this didn't work. But he had found something tucked inside his grandmother's Bible. A folded piece of paper with a family tree on it and one name circled in red pen at the top. A name the entire world knew. So one night, after hearing his grandmother cry through the wall, Tobias got up. He turned on his desk lamp. He pulled out a sheet of notebook paper and a pencil. He wrote a letter. He folded it 3 times. He found a stamp in the kitchen drawer. And before sunrise the next morning, before anyone else in that house was awake, he walked down the gravel road to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. He was terrified. He put the letter in anyway. Then he waited. Days passed. The mailbox stayed empty. The deadline kept counting down. 9 days, 8, 7, 6, 5. He stopped hoping out loud. He started just sitting in the barn with his favorite chicken, letting the silence be heavy around him, wondering if the most foolish thing he had ever done was also the bravest, or just foolish. And then, on day 3, he heard tires on the gravel road. Slow, careful, coming up toward the house through the morning mist. He stood up. He walked to the barn door. He looked out through the gap, and what he saw made his heart stop completely for 1 full second. A black SUV at the bottom of the driveway, the engine cutting off, the door opening. Meek and a man stepping out into the red Carolina dust, tall, quiet, no cameras, no fanfare, looking up at that farmhouse like he already knew every crack in the porch wood. Cecilia was on the porch. She saw him. Her coffee mug hit the floor and shattered, and she didn't even look down. Because standing at the end of her gravel road, in a simple gray jacket, holding his cap in both hands, was Michael Jordan. But here is the part that nobody knew yet. And here is the secret that was sitting quietly underneath all of it, buried in an old document from 1887, waiting to be found. The connection between this family and Michael Jordan was not what anyone thought it was. It was not distant. It was not thin. It was not just a name circled in red pen on a genealogy chart. What Dr. Wanda Fitch discovered when she kept digging, 1 layer deeper than anyone had looked before, was something that would change the entire story. Something that would rewrite what this farm meant, what this family was, and exactly why Michael Jordan stood in that red dirt like he already belonged there. Watch this video all the way through, because what happens next, inside that farmhouse, around that scarred kitchen table, And later, standing under a pecan tree carved with two sets of initials from 1941, is one of the most remarkable true stories you will ever hear. And the secret at the end? See, it will change the way you see every single moment that came before it. To understand why Michael Jordan drove up that gravel road, you have to go back. Way back. Back to a man named Elias Dupree. Elias was born in 1901 in a tiny sharecropper's cabin in Mineral Springs, North Carolina. He came into the world with nothing but his name and the red dirt under his feet. He worked fields that belonged to other men. He planted seeds he would never profit from. And he picked cotton under a sun that didn't care how tired his back was. But Elias Dupree had something that hard work couldn't give a man, and hard times couldn't take away. He had belief. Every night after the fields, he sat on the cabin step and watched the fireflies blink in the dark. His wife, Naomi, would bring him water and sit beside him. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They both knew what they were working toward. Land. Their own land. A place where the sunrise belonged to them and no one else. He saved money in a tin can tucked under a loose floorboard. Nickels. Dimes. Sometimes a folded dollar bill. He never touched it. Not once. Not even during the hard winters when the food ran low and the fireplace ran cold. In 1941, Elias Dupree bought 42 acres, a farmhouse, a barn with a red door, a pecan tree in the yard, a well he dug himself. The day he signed the papers, he walked out into the middle of his field and stood there in the tall grass. Naomi watched from the porch. She said later that he stood so still she thought something was wrong. Then his shoulders started shaking. He was crying. Not from sadness, from something much bigger than that. The kind of crying that happens when a man finally gets what he spent his whole life earning. She walked out and held him up, and they both cried together in the middle of that field while the Carolina wind moved through the grass around them like it was celebrating too. That farm stayed in the Dupree family for over 80 years. Now, deep in the branches of that same family tree, there lived a woman named Cecilia Dupree Holt. She was Elias's granddaughter, 58 years old. Muddy boots, strong hands, a voice like warm gravel. She had married a quiet, a steady man named Roy Holt, who painted the red barn door every spring, without being asked, and never once complained about a single hard day. Roy had passed 2 years ago. Stroke. Middle of the night. Cecilia had kept the farm going alone ever since. She had a son named Darren in Atlanta who thought the land was just land. She had a daughter named Priya in Charlotte who drove up every other weekend to help with the crops. And she had an 11-year-old grandson named Tobias, Priya's boy, who loved the farm the way children love the things they don't yet know they're about to lose. Tobias spent every school break here. He learned to plant soybeans, fix fences, and name every chicken. He slept in the same bedroom Elias Dupree had built with his own hands. He ate breakfast at the same scarred kitchen table, where Elias and Naomi had eaten every morning of their married life, and he didn't know any of this was about to disappear. But the bank did. The debt had been building for 3 years. A drought year had started it. Then fertilizer prices climbed. Then the tractor broke down twice. Then Roy died and left a hole in the farm that no machine could fill. The loans piled up slow and quiet, the way dangerous things often do. $187,000 in total. The bank sent letters, then a lawyer, then a final notice with a date circled in red. 9 days. 9 days before everything Elias cried over in that field was gone. On the morning everything changed, Tobias was sitting in the barn talking to a chicken named Duchess, telling her that everything was going to be okay. He had heard Grandma C crying through the wall the night before. He was 11 years old, and he had no plan, and no money, and no power. But 3 weeks earlier, without telling a single soul, he had done something. Something small. Something that was either the bravest thing a boy could do, or the most foolish. Nobody knew which one yet. 3 weeks earlier, on a Wednesday afternoon, Tobias had come home from school to find Grandma C sitting at the kitchen table staring at a piece of paper. She wasn't reading it. She was just staring at it, the way people stare at things that have already hurt them, and might hurt them again if they look too long. She folded it quickly when she heard his backpack hit the floor. "How was school?" she asked. "Fine," he said. But he had already seen the word "Final Notice" printed across the top in bold black letters before she folded it away. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in Elias's old bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around him. The pipes knocked. The wind pushed against the windows. Somewhere outside, Duchess clucked once and went quiet. And through the thin wall between his room and the kitchen, he heard the sound he had been hearing every night for 2 weeks. Grandma C, crying softly, trying not to be heard. He pulled the covers up to his chin and thought hard. He was 11. He had $23 in a jar on his dresser. He couldn't drive. He couldn't call a bank. He couldn't fix $187,000 with anything in his pockets or anything in this house. But then he remembered the Bible. And 3 weeks ago he had been dusting the bookshelf, one of his chores, and Grandma C's Bible had slipped from the shelf and fallen open on the floor. A folded piece of paper had slid out from between the pages. He picked it up, meaning to put it back without looking. But the word Jordan, printed in bold letters at the top, stopped him cold. He read it. It was a letter from a family researcher named Dr. Wanda Fitch in Durham, and it explained a bloodline connection, thin but real, between the Dupree family and the Jordan family of North Carolina. It included a hand-drawn family tree diagram with one name circled in red pen at the top. Michael Jordan. Tobias had stood there holding that paper for a long time. He put it back in the Bible. He finished his dusting. He didn't say a word. But the idea had taken root. That Wednesday night, after hearing Grandma C cry through the wall, he got up, and he turned on his small desk lamp. He pulled out a sheet of wide-ruled notebook paper and a pencil, not a pen, because he knew he'd need to erase. And he sat down. He wrote slowly. He crossed things out. He started over twice. The final letter said, "Dear Mr. Jordan, my name is Tobias, and I am 11. I think we might be distant family. My great-great-great-grandpa, Elias Dupree, was cousins with your family a long time ago. My grandma, Cecilia, is going to lose the farm in 9 days. She built her whole life here. My grandpa built it too before he died. I know you are very busy and famous, but I thought maybe family helps family. I am not sure this is the right address, but I had to try. Your possible cousin, Tobias." He read it back 3 times. It wasn't perfect. It didn't sound smart or impressive. It sounded exactly like what it was. A scared boy who loved his grandmother and had run out of every other idea. He folded it 3 times. Done, he found a stamp in the kitchen drawer. He wrote the address from a fan mail website he had found on the school library computer. The next morning, before Grandma C was awake, he walked down the gravel road to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. His sneakers were wet from the morning dew. His hands were cold. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. He opened the mailbox. He stood there for a long moment, letter in hand. Then he put it in. raised the red flag, and walked back to the house. He told no one. Not Grandma C. Not his mother Priya. Not Darren. Not even Duchess. Every afternoon after school, he checked the mailbox on his way up the road. Every afternoon, it was empty. The days counted down like a clock, with no snooze button. 9, 8, 7, 6. He stopped telling Duchess everything was going to be okay. He just sat beside her in the barn and let the silence be what it was. 5, 4, 3. On the morning of day 3, Tobias was in the barn with his head resting against Duchess's warm feathers when he heard tires on gravel. Slow, careful, coming up the road. He lifted his head. Through the barn's open door, at the bottom of the long driveway, he saw a black SUV moving through the morning mist, like something from a dream he hadn't dared to have. His whole body went still. It couldn't be. He stood up slowly. He walked to the barn door. He looked. And his heart, that same heart that had hammered so hard at the mailbox 3 weeks ago, stopped completely for 1 full second. Then it came back, stronger than before. Tobias pressed himself flat against the barn wall and watched through the gap in the door. The black SUV had stopped at the top of the driveway. The engine cut off. The morning went very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens right before something important. Not like the second before lightning and the second before thunder are two completely different things. The driver's door opened first. A woman stepped out, young, sharp eyes. She wore a dark jacket and carried a leather folder under one arm. She looked at the farmhouse, then at the barn, then back at the farmhouse. Then the passenger door opened, and the world changed. He was taller than Tobias expected. That was the first thing. The second thing was how quiet he was. No music, no entourage, and no cameras following him up the path. Just a man in a simple gray jacket and dark pants, standing in the red Carolina dust, turning slowly to look at the farm the way a person looks at something they recognize but can't quite place yet, like a memory they hadn't thought about in years. Michael Jordan put his hands in his pockets and looked up at the farmhouse. Tobias stopped breathing. Inside the house, Grandma C had heard the tires on the gravel. She had moved to the front window, pulled back the curtain, and seen the black SUV. Her face had gone hard and tired immediately. She had been expecting this. The bank's lawyer had mentioned he might send someone early. She smoothed her apron. She squared her shoulders the way women do when they are about to face something they are not ready for but will face anyway. She opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. She looked down the path at the man standing in her driveway. The coffee mug slipped from her fingers, and it hit the porch floor and shattered, but she didn't look down. She couldn't look away. Her hand came up slowly and covered her mouth. Her eyes went wide and stayed wide. Michael Jordan walked up the porch steps slowly, cap in his hands, holding it the way a man holds his hat when he enters a church or stands at a graveside. With respect, with weight. "Ms. Dupree Holt," he said. His voice was low and even. "I got a letter from your grandson." Cecilia did not speak. She tried once, and nothing came out. She tried again. "My—" She stopped. She turned slowly toward the barn. Her eyes found the gap in the door where 2 small sneakers were visible in the dirt underneath. "Tobias James Holt," she said. Her voice was not angry. It was something much harder to describe than anger. It was the voice of a woman who has been carrying something so heavy for so long that when someone finally shows up to help lift it, the feeling comes out sideways. As shock, as disbelief. as a kind of broken gratefulness that doesn't have a clean name. "You get out here right now," she said. The barn door creaked. Tobias came out slowly, chin tucked toward his chest, hands deep in his hoodie pocket. He walked up the path the way a boy walks when he is not sure if he is in trouble or not, feet dragging just enough to buy time, eyes up just enough to read the room. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked at Michael Jordan standing there. Michael Jordan looked back at him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The morning wind moved through the dead corn across the road. Duchess wandered out of the barn behind Tobias and stood at his heel like a loyal, completely unbothered bodyguard. "I wrote him a letter," Tobias said quietly, "to Grandma C. About 3 weeks ago." He paused. "I didn't actually think it would work." Cecilia made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. Michael Jordan looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he did something nobody expected. He crouched down. The most decorated basketball player who had ever lived lowered himself onto one knee right there on the porch steps, right there in the red Carolina dirt, so that he and an 11-year-old boy were looking at each other at exactly the same height, eye to eye, man to boy, or maybe just person to person. "You want to know something?" he said. His voice was quiet, almost private, and like what he was about to say was meant only for Tobias, and not for any camera or crowd that would ever hear this story later. Tobias nodded. He didn't trust his voice yet. "I used to tell myself, the only shot you miss is the one you never take." Michael paused and let that settle. "You took the shot." And that was all it took. Tobias's whole face crumpled. The tears came fast and hard, but the way they do when a child has been holding them back for weeks, and something finally says, "It's okay now. You can let go." He scrubbed at his face with his sleeve, but there was no catching up. Cecilia came down the porch steps and pulled him against her side. She was crying too. She didn't try to hide it or wipe it away. She just let it come. Standing on the land her grandfather had bought in 1941, holding her grandson, crying in the morning light. Michael Jordan stood up slowly. He looked out across the 42 acres, the broken corn stalks, the red barn door, the old pecan tree in the yard, and his jaw tightened once, the way it does when a man sees something that matters and decides quietly, completely, that he is going to do something about it. "Is there somewhere we can sit down?" he asked. Cecilia wiped her face with her apron. "I've got coffee on," she said. He nodded once, and they went inside. That the kitchen smelled like coffee and old wood, and something faintly sweet, the ghost of every pie Cecilia had ever baked in that oven. The morning light came through the window above the sink in long yellow strips, falling across the kitchen table the way light falls in places that have held a lot of living. That table had held all of it. Sunday breakfasts, homework, arguments that got resolved before bedtime, Roy's medication bottles lined up by the salt shaker in his last year, birthday cakes, Christmas mornings, and now this. Michael Jordan pulling out a chair and sitting down like it was the most natural thing in the world. He sat in Roy's old chair. He didn't know it was Roy's, but Cecilia knew. She saw it the moment he pulled it out, and she felt something move through her chest. Not pain exactly, but the particular ache of two things existing at once. Grief and hope, sitting in the same chair at the same table. She poured 4 cups of coffee without asking if anyone wanted any, and nobody complained. Michael Jordan had brought 2 people inside with him. The first was Renata Okafor, the young woman with the sharp eyes and the leather folder. She sat to his left and opened that folder quietly, neatly, the way someone does when they've prepared carefully and want the preparation to show without making a fuss about it. The second person was a large, calm man named Gerald Pace. He wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck and spoke in a low, steady voice that made hard numbers feel like something a person could actually survive. Gerald had spent 15 years working with black-owned farms across the South. Farms exactly like this one. Families exactly like this one. Helping them find footing when the ground underneath kept shifting. He pulled his own folder from a worn leather bag. Tobias sat at the far end of the table. He had stopped crying. His face was still puffy, but his eyes were sharp and alert, tracking everything. He had found a pencil somewhere and was holding it over his notebook, ready. Gerald laid it all out simply and honestly. The debt was real. The timeline was real. The bank would not wait and could not be argued with using anything less than money. $187,000. Cecilia listened, with her hands folded on the table and her eyes steady. She had known the number for months. Hearing it out loud in her own kitchen still felt like a stone dropping into still water. "But here's what else is real," Gerald said. He tapped the table once with 2 fingers. "This land is real. 42 acres of North Carolina soil, a working barn, a sound farmhouse, and 80 years of family history, sitting in this ground like roots nobody can see, but everybody can feel." He leaned forward. "Ms. Dupree-Holt, this farm doesn't just have dollar value. It has cultural value, historical value. And with the right structure underneath it, it can support itself and your family for the next 80 years, too." Cecilia's eyes moved from Gerald to Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan nodded once, slowly, like a man confirming something he had already decided before he ever boarded the jet. The plan had 3 parts. Part 1 was the debt. Michael Jordan's foundation would pay off the full $187,000. Not a loan. Not a repayment arrangement. A gift. Family to family. Root to root. No paperwork requiring her to pay it back. No strings pulling in any direction. Cecilia shook her head before he finished the sentence. "I can't accept something like that," she said. Her voice was firm, but her eyes were bright. "I don't take charity. Roy didn't raise this family on charity, and neither did Elias before him." The kitchen went quiet. Michael Jordan looked at her for a long moment. He didn't rush his answer. He let the silence sit there respectfully before he spoke into it. "Ms. Dupree-Holt," he said. "Elias Dupree spent his whole life building something that deserved to outlast him. You have been holding it up alone with 2 hands for 2 years." He paused. "This isn't charity. Charity is a stranger, giving a stranger something out of pity." His voice was quiet, but it carried weight in every word. "This is family, carrying what got too heavy for one person to hold." The room was very still. Tobias had stopped writing. He was watching his grandmother. Cecilia pressed her lips together. Her chin lifted slightly. She looked at the window, at the red barn door visible across the yard, at the pecan tree, at Roy's empty hook by the back door where his favorite cap still hung. Then she nodded. Once, small, but real. Part 2 was the future. Gerald explained it carefully. The farm would be restructured as a heritage agriculture cooperative, a legal organization that would protect the land permanently. No future debt could threaten it the same way again. Cecilia, Priya, and eventually Tobias would all hold legal ownership stake. A network of black farmers' organizations across North Carolina would provide ongoing support and resources. "So nobody can ever take it," Tobias said from the end of the table. "Nobody," Gerald confirmed. Part 3 was the crop. The farm would plant sorghum and specialty herbs, higher market value, lower water cost, better suited to the land's current condition. Gerald had already spoken to buyers in Charlotte and Raleigh who would purchase the harvest directly. No middlemen taking cuts. Clean, fair, profitable. Tobias was doing math on his notebook paper. He looked up. "So, we keep the farm?" "You keep the farm," Gerald said. Tobias looked at Grandma C. She was crying again, silently, the way she cried when she thought no one was watching. Hands folded on the table, head slightly bowed, like she was right in the middle of a prayer she had been saying for 2 years, and had just heard the answer come back. Michael Jordan leaned forward. "Your grandfather, Elias, bought this land in 1941, he said, before this country had fully decided what it believed about who deserved to own something. And your family owned it anyway. He let that land. That story doesn't disappear. You protect it. You pass it down. And one day, Tobias sits at this same table and tells his own kids what happened here today." Cecilia reached across the scarred, burned, coffee-ringed, knife-marked table. She took Michael Jordan's hand in both of hers. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Outside, the October wind moved through the dead corn stalks across the road. But inside that kitchen, around that table, and in that house that Elias Dupree had built from nothing but belief and a tin can full of saved coins, something that had been close to dying was breathing again. Slowly, steadily, like it had every intention of staying. After the folders were closed and the coffee cups were empty, Michael Jordan pushed back his chair and looked at Cecilia with an expression that had nothing businesslike left in it. "Would you show me around?" he asked. It was such a simple request, so quiet and genuine that it caught Cecilia off guard. She had expected him to gather his things, shake her hand, and climb back into that black SUV. Famous people were always moving toward the next place. She had assumed he was no different. But he was still sitting there, waiting. "You want to see the farm?" she said. "I want to see the farm." She stood up and straightened her apron. "Then come on," she said. Tobias was out the door before either of them, though they walked every inch of those 42 acres. Cecilia moved slowly and deliberately, the way a person moves through a place they know so well their feet don't need to think about it. She talked as she walked, not performing, not explaining, just remembering out loud the way people do when someone finally gives them the space to. She showed him the well first. "Elias dug this by hand," she said, running her palm along the stone edge. "Roy used to say the water from this well tasted different than any other water. Sweeter. I always thought that was just Roy being Roy." She paused, but I think he was right. Michael Jordan looked down into the well for a moment without speaking. Then she took him to the red barn door. She told him about Roy painting it every spring. Every single spring for 30 years without being asked and without making a fuss about it. Just a man who understood that some things needed tending and took it upon himself to do the tending. Michael Jordan ran his hand slowly down the barn door. The paint was faded now, chipped at the corners. It had been almost 2 years since anyone had painted it. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened in the way it had when he first looked out across the field from the porch, like he was making a quiet decision nobody else could hear. They saved the pecan tree for last. See, it stood in the far corner of the yard, thick and ancient, its bare October branches reaching in every direction like arms that had been open a very long time. Tobias ran ahead and stood under it, looking up through the branches at the gray sky above. Cecilia stopped in front of it and pointed to the trunk. There in the bark, carved deep and dark with age, were the letters ED plus ND, 1941. Elias Dupree, Naomi Dupree, the year they bought the land, and the year they stood in the field and cried together in the tall grass, the year a tin can full of saved nickels and dimes became 42 acres, and a red barn door, and a well that tasted sweet. Michael Jordan stepped forward and pressed his fingers against those carved letters. He stayed like that for a long moment, perfectly still, eyes down. When he looked up, there was something different in his face, something that hadn't been there in the kitchen, a kind of recognition that went deeper than family trees and genealogy documents and names circled in red pen. "My father used to talk about the old county," he said quietly. "He said roots go deeper than you can see." Cecilia nodded slowly. Elias used to say the same thing, almost those exact words. They looked at each other. Two people standing under a very old tree on a very old piece of land, feeling the particular weight of being connected to something larger than themselves, larger than basketball, larger than debt, larger than loss. Tobias had his notebook out. He was writing fast, trying to catch everything before it slipped away. Cecilia noticed and tilted her head at him. "What are you doing?" "Writing it down," he said, not looking up. "So I remember." She watched her grandson for a moment, this boy who wrote letters to famous strangers and planted seeds in cold dirt and talked to chickens like they were friends, and felt something rise in her chest so strong she had to press her lips together to hold it in. Michael Jordan looked at Tobias too. Then the smallest smile crossed his face. "Smart kid," he said. "He gets it from Elias," Cecilia said. And then, without any warning, without any build-up or announcement, Duchess the chicken came marching around the corner of the barn with her chest out and her head high, walked directly past Michael Jordan's feet without a single pause, and disappeared into the yard. Complete indifference, zero acknowledgement of greatness. Tobias looked up from his notebook. "That's Duchess." Michael Jordan looked down at the retreating chicken. "She's got confidence." "She knows it too," Tobias said. And then all of them were laughing. Cecilia, Renata, Gerald, Tobias, Michael Jordan. All of them standing in the October dust under Elias and Naomi's pecan tree, laughing at a chicken who had no idea she had just walked past one of the most famous men alive, and simply did not care. It was the most ordinary, beautiful, human moment. The kind that only happens on a farm. The kind that no city, no arena, no championship stage could ever manufacture or replace. 3 days after Michael Jordan's visit, Gerald Pace called Cecilia with confirmation. The debt had been paid in full. Every dollar, every fee, every late charge the bank had quietly added to the pile when nobody was looking. All of it. Gone. Wiped clean like writing from a chalkboard. Cecilia held the phone against her ear and listened to Gerald read the numbers. Then she set the phone down on the kitchen table very carefully. She sat in her chair. Not Roy's chair, on her own chair, and put both hands flat on the table and breathed. In and out. In and out. Like a woman who had been underwater for 2 years and had just broken the surface. She stayed like that for a long time before she did anything else. Then she got up, tied her apron, and started making a pie. She was up at 5 in the morning on the day the deadline passed, before the sun, before the birds, before even Duchess had stirred in the barn. The kitchen was dark, except for the light above the stove, and Cecilia moved through it by memory. Every drawer, every shelf, every measuring cup exactly where it had always been. She measured flour. She cut cold butter. She peeled sweet potatoes and boiled them soft. She hummed while she worked. The hymn had no name that she knew. Here it was just something Naomi had hummed to Elias, and Elias had hummed to her mother, and her mother had hummed to her, passed down not through any book or recording, but simply through the air between one generation and the next, like pollen, like warmth, like all the best things that refuse to be written down, because they belong to the body and not the page. She was pulling the pie from the oven when Priya's headlights swept across the kitchen window. Your Priya came through the door with her husband Arun behind her, carrying 2 bags of groceries. She stepped inside. She smelled the pie. She looked at her mother standing at the stove in the early morning light, apron on, face calm and certain. Priya started crying before she even got her coat off. She didn't try to explain it. There was nothing to explain. Some feelings don't need words. They just need the right room to happen in. Cecilia opened her arms. Priya walked into them, and they stood like that in the kitchen for a long, quiet minute, while Arun set the groceries down gently and looked at the ceiling the way good men do when they are trying not to cry in front of people. He did not entirely succeed. Darren arrived an hour later. He had driven down from Atlanta before sunrise without telling anyone. He pulled up the gravel road and sat in his car for a moment before getting out. Through the kitchen window, he could see his mother moving around that stove. Unhurried, sure-footed, completely at home in every inch of that space. He watched her for a moment before going in. He had told her to sell this place. More than once. More than twice. He had used words like practical and realistic and letting go. He had meant them kindly and said them badly, the way people sometimes do when they are afraid of something they don't know how to name. What he had been afraid of, he understood now, was this: the farm outlasting his ability to protect his mother, and the land becoming something he couldn't carry for her. But she had never needed him to carry it. She had just needed him to believe she could. He walked through the back door and wrapped both arms around her from behind and pressed his face to the top of her head and said nothing. Not one word. Cecilia patted his arm twice. She understood. She had always understood. She held no grudge against a single day of it. Outside, Tobias was in the garden. Sir Gerald had mailed him a packet of sorghum seeds with a handwritten note that said, "Plant these in spring." The note had underlined the word spring twice. Tobias read the note. He considered the underline. Then he went outside, found a soft patch of dirt near the garden fence, and pressed one single seed into the ground with his thumb. One seed. Cold November dirt. Wrong season. But Tobias was not being careless, and he was being something else entirely. Something harder to argue with than good timing or practical advice. He was being hopeful. And there is a difference. By noon, the driveway was full. Word had moved through Mineral Springs the way word always moves through small towns, fast, warm, unstoppable. Miss Eunice from down the road appeared with a pot of collard greens still steaming. The Abernathy brothers from the next farm over backed their truck up and unloaded enough firewood to last the whole winter. A woman named Della Wynne, who had known Roy since before either of them had gray hair, sat herself down in the corner of the kitchen and started telling Roy stories. She told the one about Roy trying to fix the toaster. She pointed at the burned spot on the table when she got to the punchline. Everyone laughed. Then everyone cried a little. Then everyone laughed again. And the farm had not held this many people since Roy's funeral, but this was nothing like a funeral. This was the opposite of a funeral. This was a house remembering how to be full. Cecilia stood at the kitchen window in the middle of all of it. The noise, the neighbors, the smell of pie and collard greens and firewood coming through the door, and looked out at the pecan tree, at the red barn door, at the field. She thought about Elias standing in that tall grass in 1941, crying because he finally owned what he had spent his whole life earning. She thought about Roy painting that door every spring. She thought about a boy in muddy sneakers walking to a mailbox before sunrise, carrying a folded letter and more courage than most grown people ever find. "Grandma, see?" Tobias appeared at her elbow, cheeks red from the cold outside, notebook tucked under his arm. "What, baby?" "Do you think Elias knew?" He looked out the window at the pecan tree. That the farm would still be here this long? Cecilia was quiet for a moment. She looked at the carved letters in the bark. ED plus ND, 1941. She looked at the red barn door Roy had painted 30 times with his own hands. She looked at the cold November dirt where one small seed was sitting underground right now, waiting. "I think," she said slowly, choosing each word the way you choose something precious off a shelf, "he knew it should be here." She paused. "See, and sometimes that's enough to make it happen." Tobias considered this seriously. Then he opened his notebook and wrote it down. Every single word. 3 days after the papers were signed, and the neighbors went home, and the leftover sweet potato pie had been wrapped in foil and placed on the second shelf of the refrigerator exactly where Cecilia always put leftovers, Tobias's mother, Priya, got a phone call. And she was standing at the kitchen sink, washing the last of the dishes, when her phone buzzed on the counter. The name on the screen read, "Renata Okafor." She dried her hands. She answered. "Ms. Priya," Renata said. Her voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone who is holding something significant and wants to set it down without dropping it. Dr. Fitch, the genealogist who confirmed the family connection, she kept digging after our visit. She found something else. A pause. I think you should sit down." Priya pulled out a kitchen chair and sat. She listened. The kitchen was bright and warm around her. She could hear Tobias outside talking to his one planted sorghum seed the way he talked to Duchess, cheerfully, with complete confidence that it was listening. She could hear Cecilia humming in the back room. She could hear Arun's car radio through the open window. All of it felt very far away. When Renata finished talking, Priya sat holding the phone against her ear for a long time, even though the call had ended. Then she stood up. She walked outside. Tobias was crouched near the garden fence, inspecting the exact patch of dirt where he had pressed his seed. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. "Mom? What's wrong?" Priya crouched down beside him. She looked at her son, this boy with muddy knees and a pencil behind his ear and notebook pages sticking out of every pocket. This boy who had written a letter in the dark and walked to a mailbox before sunrise and saved a farm with nothing but wide-ruled paper and the belief that trying mattered even when the odds didn't. "You know how we thought our connection to Michael Jordan's family came through Elias's mother and Curtis Jordan's mother being sisters?" she said carefully. "Yeah," Tobias said. "Distant cousins." Dr. Fitch kept looking. Priya pulled out her phone. Her hands were not entirely steady. She went back further, all the way back to an 1887 census record. She held the screen out. Tobias leaned in and read. It was a scanned document, old and faded, the ink thin in places, the handwriting looping and uneven the way handwriting was before typewriters made everyone's letters look the same. It listed the residents of a single household in Columbus County, North Carolina. Two names sat side by side on the same line. Dupree Samuel, age 34. Jordan Samuel, age 34. Tobias read it twice, then a third time. His eyebrows pulled together slowly the way they did when he was working out a math problem that didn't add up yet. Same name, he said. Same age. Same house. Same person, Tobias. Priya's voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Fitch believes Samuel was one man who, somewhere across the years, split into two names. Maybe a census error. Maybe a deliberate change when he moved counties. Maybe something we'll never fully know. She paused. Deep but one branch of his family moved forward as Dupree, and another moved forward as Jordan. Tobias went very still. The November wind moved through the bare branches of the pecan tree across the yard. He looked at his mother. So, Elias and Michael Jordan's family aren't just distant cousins, he said slowly. Priya shook her head. Then, we're not connected through somebody's somebody, he said. No. He looked back at the screen, at the two names on the same line in a document from 1887. Not at the faded ink that had been sitting in an archive somewhere for over 100 years, waiting quietly for someone to look close enough. We're the same family, he said. The same family, Priya confirmed. Not thinly, not distantly, not connected by a thread that might snap if you pulled it. The same blood, the same man, the same beginning, split apart by nothing more than time and geography, and the way history sometimes loses track of people who deserve to be remembered, and brought back together by a boy who decided that love was worth the cost of a stamp. Tobias looked down at the cold dirt where his one seed was sitting underground. Something moved across his face, slow and wide and completely unstoppable. The kind of smile that starts somewhere deep before it ever reaches the surface. He pressed his fingers into the earth above the seed, gently, like a greeting, like a homecoming, like, hello, I found you. After all this time, I found you. The sorghum came up in April, all 42 acres of it, tall and red gold and swaying in the Carolina breeze, like it had been waiting underground its whole life. Not just through one cold winter, but through decades, through drought years and debt years and grief years, waiting patiently for someone to finally lean down and say, grow. Tobias stood at the edge of the field in his school clothes, backpack still on, one sneaker untied. He had come straight from the bus, though he hadn't even gone inside yet. He just stood at the field's edge and looked out at what had grown from ground that had nearly been taken away and couldn't make himself move. Cecilia came to stand beside him without saying anything. They stood together in the April light, the boy and his grandmother, watching the sorghum move in the warm wind like something breathing, like the land itself was breathing. After a long while, Tobias spoke. It feels like Elias is still here, he said quietly. Like he never left. Cecilia looked out across the field. He didn't, she said simply. None of them did. She put her hand on his shoulder. That's what land does, baby. It holds people long after they're gone. Tobias thought about that. He thought about Elias and Naomi crying in the tall grass in 1941. He thought about Roy painting the red barn door every spring without being asked. He thought about a pencil-written letter, folded 3 times, and placed in a mailbox before sunrise. And he thought about two names on a faded census page from 1887, sitting side by side like they had been waiting to be found. He thought about all the ways a family can lose each other across time, and all the ways they can find their way back. Michael Jordan had sent a note 2 weeks after his visit. Plain white paper. Handwritten. It said, "Cecilia, tell Tobias the seed he planted in November is the most important one on the whole farm. Some things grow slow. That doesn't mean they aren't growing." Michael. Cecilia had framed it. She hung it on the wall between a photograph of Elias standing in his field in 1941 and a photograph of Roy on a ladder, painting the barn door red, laughing at something off camera. A wall of people who understood that the things worth having are the things worth staying for. In the fall, the cooperative sold its first harvest, sorghum, lavender, specialty peppers, to 4 restaurants and a grocery chain in Charlotte. And the profit covered the farm's full operating costs, with enough left over to fix the tractor and repaint the barn door. Darren came down from Atlanta the weekend they got the harvest numbers. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the figures Gerald had sent over. Then he looked at his mother. "I was wrong," he said, "about the farm, about all of it." Cecilia poured him a cup of coffee and set it in front of him. "I know, baby," she said. "Come down more often." He came the very next weekend. And on a warm Saturday afternoon in October, exactly 1 year after a private jet landed on a dirt road in Mineral Springs, North Carolina, the whole family gathered under the pecan tree and took a photograph together. Tobias stood in the front row. He was grinning the way children grin when they know something remarkable happened, and they were part of it. He was holding Duchess under one arm. Duchess looked completely unbothered. Above their heads, the carved letters in the bark read E.D., a plus N.D., 1941. Still there, still holding, still growing. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are listening from. It could be a big city or a small town with a gravel road just like this one. We read every single comment, and we would love to know where in the world this story found you today. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second. But it helps this story reach someone out there who might need to hear it today. Someone who is scared. Someone who is about to give up. Someone who needs to be reminded that a pencil-written letter and a little bit of courage can change absolutely everything. Subscribe to this channel too. Because this is what we do here. We find the stories that remind us that people are still out there doing remarkable things for each other. Stories about family, about holding on, and about 11-year-old boys who walk to mailboxes before sunrise because love is always worth the cost of a stamp. Spread that kindness. Share this video with someone who needs it today. And right now, click the video appearing on your screen, because the next story is already waiting for you. And trust us, you do not want to miss it.